Hi, this is George Lucas, and I'd like to welcome you to the audio commentary on Episode 2. Attack of the Clones is actually a reference that appears in Episode 4 when Princess Leia is asking Obi-Wan for help. And it's the Clone War that is really the centerpiece of the downfall of the Jedi Order and the ultimate rise of the Empire. The Clone War is very, very important in the whole epic of Star Wars. In Episode 1, I was able to get rid of all the exposition about how the Senate works, the politics of the Trade Federation, and that sort of thing. So this time I was more free to actually get on with the story of how all this plays into the ultimate demise of the Republic.
We wanted the opening scenes with the arrival of the spaceship to be eerie and mysterious, and so the music score was played rather lightly and with high strings and low tones. And this made the design of the spaceship sounds a little difficult because with spaceships, especially those that come thundering right over camera, it's hard to play the sound down when it's visually so big.
This is an interesting set because we didn't actually build it for episode 2. We actually took the plate that we had shot on episode 1, removed the actors, and redid this scene against blue screen and comped them into that spaceship.
Amidala's ship coming out of the fog here was done with computer graphics for the ship and all the buildings. The idea was to have the whole platform kind of enshrouded in fog to set a bit of a somber tone for the scene.
So I had to sort of have an assassination attempt, which was the original story. But I decided that I'd sort of blow up a big spaceship and use a decoy, and I think gave it a more lively opening to the film. I also like the fact that R2 is actually the first character that gets a close-up and is introduced into the movie. It's ultimately R2's story.
I guess I was wrong. There was no danger at all.
While we were in Sydney, we actually ran out of stages. So we turned our art department into a stage itself where we shot this particular sequence. We only built the floor and had the platform coming down for where the actors could walk in, and that's where we did the explosions.
You guys also added its computer-generated fire and smoke as well, right?
Most of the fire in that shot is live-action elements that we shot out in the back lot.
Editorially, it was discovered in the first cut of this scene that R2 had been forgotten as a character in this scene, or he wasn't included in the actual script as a character arriving on Coruscant with Padme. And so, as an after-the-fact measure, R2 was carefully shot, sometimes the actual R2 model, as well as a digital R2 when necessary, and he was then included into this scene.
So here we are in Coruscant, and we're heading into Palpatine's office, and sitting there on screen left is a digital Yoda. Yoda was really the reason I wanted to do this movie. George and I had talked about a digital Yoda during episode 1, and we had done 2 shots of Yoda digitally. There was a walking shot when he was talking to Obi-Wan, and then there was a shot in the funeral. But I felt it was important for us to make the leap and to convince George that we could handle a digital Yoda performance. You can see in shots like this the care that we put into his eyes, his eyebrows, and then his mouth. We certainly spent a lot of time studying what Frank Oz had done in episode 5, Empire, and looking at the range of performance. Frank and I talked about it at the beginning of the production, and he said, you almost have too much potential. You can do things with your computer-generated Yoda that I could never do with a puppet. And I felt that was right, that I wanted to remain true to the puppet's performance. And here you can see I was walking across the floor we studied what Frank had done with the puppet, how he moved the puppet, and then sort of extrapolated that down into the walk. I had read, long before I joined ILM, I'd read that, George wanted to see Yoda walk, that he felt that he wanted to see that character in a more important role and unrestricted by the techniques that they had done in the 70s and 80s. So this sequence was our first chance to show off what we could do. You can see his clothing, his facial performance, his skin, and even little jitters in his ears. You'll see those. We started animating Yoda, and when we didn't have the jitters in the ears, it didn't look like the puppet. And we wanted it to look just like the puppet, but sort of upgraded to the time that we live in now, 22 years ahead. And this shot here became one of George's early favorites. And the reason is because it's acting. He's not speaking, he's acting, and we can tell that he doesn't quite trust what Palpatine's saying in this scene. I remember giving it to Leslie Hedrick, who's one of my animators, and she wasn't too keen on it because it wasn't an acting, talking shot in her mind. And I said, Leslie, this is going to become one of the most important shots for Yoda early on in the movie, establishing that this is a legitimate, realistic character in this movie, an important character in this movie, and it certainly became that. You can see the weight as he transfers himself on and off of his cane, and how the clothing interacts with that.
You seem a little on edge.
This little scene wasn't in the original script, and when I cut the film together, I realized that I needed an entrance for Anakin and Obi-Wan that was more than him just coming in the door of the apartment. And I needed something that kind of warmed up their relationship a little bit, because in the next scene, they actually are at each other's throats a little bit. And I wanted you to establish first that they were partners and friends, and even though it's there's a little bit of tension between the two of them, they have a history of warm friendship.
Episode 2, like in Episode 1, we had Ahmed Best in the costume for Jar Jar, walking through every sequence so that we could tell how the clothing was going to react. In this case, this is a fully computer-generated Jar Jar with digital clothing. The thing about the clothing is it has to act and react just like the real clothing. So you can see how they walk into the room here. The real clothing, of course, is flowing back and forth, and so does Jar Jar's. It needs to move and be real. Otherwise, the audience is pulled out of the moment. It doesn't believe that this digital character is really living and breathing in that scene. So this is important for us to make sure we're not calling attention to ourselves. Sometimes it's hard with Jar Jar, but in this case, 10 years on, he's now a senator, and he's wearing these elaborate costumes that have been designed by Tricia Biggard, who designed all the costumes for all the live-action characters. You'll see in this shot, when Jar Jar walks through the scene, he walks through and then sits down on the couch. Watch how the clothing folds and sits. I'm bringing it to your attention now so you can study it, but we don't want you to be studying that character. We want you to just take in the scene that it's 5 people sitting down and talking to each other.
I want to know who's trying to kill me.
Also, this scene establishes the fact that Annie and Padme haven't seen each other in 10 years, so that there's no history that we don't know about. The tough part about this scene is that Obi-Wan is the bit of the conservative of the two, and his character has been established primarily by Alec Guinness in the first trilogy, but I still wanted to give Obi-Wan some charm and some wit and make him a likable character, and realize that even though he's the stern taskmaster and mentor, he still cares about Anakin, and he's more frustrated with this, their relationship and Anakin's sort of unwillingness to go along with the rules. Obi-Wan finds himself in the same situation actually that he had with Qui-Gon Jinn, where Qui-Gon Jinn was constantly sort of moving beyond the bounds, and now he's got an apprentice that's doing the same thing.
I'll have an officer stationed on every floor, and I'll be in the control center downstairs.
Mr. Bustin' with happiness seeing you again, Annie.
She hardly even recognized me, Jar Jar.
It was an extremely difficult sequence to color correct. In other words, to get the colors right. We didn't really have the time to set up properly because we had changed the sequence from a night sequence to a day sequence. So we were fighting the fact that we had to actually move from this location onto another stage. And George kept on changing his mind about the look of what the scene was supposed to look like.
in introducing the bounty hunters, wanted to deal with Jango Fett, who was Boba Fett's father, and I needed a second bounty hunter who I decided I'd make into a changeling, but have her look like a beautiful woman, just so that we have a different take on bounty hunters rather than having an ugly monster. She actually is an ugly monster under her fake facade.
We did one very large matte painting that covers about a 120-degree field of view to be used throughout the scene. Since it had all this moving traffic in it, we did 20 seconds worth of traffic so that we could cover the longest shot we had to deal with.
There are many other ways to kill a senator.
I know, but we also want to catch this assassin, don't we, Master?
As Obi-Wan and Anakin wait for something to happen, I wanted to establish that Padme was asleep in the other room, that there was a certain amount of security with R2, and that Anakin is a little cocky, a little sure of himself, and constantly chafing a little bit with Obi-Wan. The scene with Obi-Wan and Anakin on the balcony is to establish that Anakin has been having nightmares about his mother, and he's a little confused about why he keeps having these recurring dreams. This obviously becomes a bigger plot point later, but we do have a chance to talk a little bit about politics and the Jedi's disenchantment with the political process due to the corruption and the ineffectiveness of the Senate.
When the assassin droid arrives, there were some interesting challenges with the sound because the visuals kind of dictated you wanted to hear the droid hovering outside the window and cutting through it. But dramatically, you couldn't be very strong with those sounds because if they were loud enough, they would have awakened R2 or alerted the Jedi or Padme as to the presence of the droid. I remember the motor that you hear just as the assassin droid cuts through the glass in the window. Is actually a little motor that was recorded inside Jabba the Hutt's head on Return of the Jedi. It was a tiny servo motor in the original puppet of Jabba the Hutt that I recorded, and that little sound has been in our library for a long time. We've used it for other things as well.
So the story point here is that the probe droid, which is animated, comes up to the door, up to the window, I should say, cuts a hole through, and then the Cahoons, or the assassin bugs, are released, and they are animated. They turned out to be very difficult. There's procedural animation is what we call it. We would animate the character along a path, and then the legs, a program was run on them to help make them contact with the ground. Whether it be on the bed or on the carpet, we would animate the overall body, and then the legs would come in afterwards.
Here with Obi-Wan, we get a little sense that Anakin has some relationship with Palpatine, and that he likes Palpatine. In the last film, we set up the fact that Palpatine was going to watch after Anakin.
I sense it too.
Anakin's lightsaber is a little long on a couple of frames there to make sure we got contact between him and the bugs.
Because I was able to use a droid to try to assassinate the senator, it lent automatically to a chase in the city.
Now here we are flying through computer-generated nighttime Coruscant. The sequence has a technical similarity to the pod race last time in that it's a lengthy scene, action chase scene with a great many shots where we had to make up the environment. There's no plates to shoot there. Instead of making rocky terrains, sand and rock, this time we had to make all these futuristic cities and all the flying traffic. And the challenge of trying to make buildings that don't all look the same, that have a distinct architecture was difficult. Throughout the sequence, the architectural style progresses. We began up near Padme's apartment where the buildings are very tall and rounded. And then as we proceed through the city, we go through different styles. We start in the upper city and then we go down into the older city where we have an older, more linear, squared off architectural style. And then from there, we go into an industrial area, big gas generation plants and electrical power stations. And then into the financial district, where we have very glassy buildings that are tall and green. And then we go into a warehouse district, where we have big storage facilities. And then into the entertainment district, where the chase ends.
When Obi-Wan is shot down and Anakin rescues him, and it appears that it's all in a day's work. There's nobody sort of excited about it. It sets up this relationship that they do these kinds of amazing stunts all the time. It's just part of their job.
The ambience on Coruscant varies depending on the density of traffic and the location within the city. There wasn't really a distinction made in the sound between daytime or nighttime. The textural distinctions were really made on the basis of the location within the city. There's the entertainment area, there's the financial district, there's the industrial section. I made up sounds which reflected the different areas, or I made up elements of sound which could be used to build, in layers, the density for each area.
Okay, coming up way over on the left-hand side of frame, there's a trench. In that trench is an X-Wing being pursued by 3 TIE fighters right here. Hard to see, but it's there.
When I started the sound design for the speeder chase sequence, the original idea I had, I thought perhaps instead of giving the sounds of the speeders a jet-like sound or a combustion sound, that I would make all of the sounds of the speeders out of musical instruments. And then for music score, I would use just percussion. Although it worked very well in the temp, it wasn't so successful when it was put up against the music that Johnny Williams wrote for this scene. He tended to be a bit more orchestral and less percussive, and I really had to change some of the sounds a bit. Zam's speeder was the most musical of the two, and the sounds for that speeder were made out of an old 1950s era electric guitar and running one's finger up and down the strings of the guitar and recording it through an old amplifier.
I'm constantly trying to deal with the fact that Anakin is slightly ahead of himself at all times. You think that he's gone a little bit too far and he's made a mistake, and then you realize that he's actually very clever. And we do that a couple times. And I like trying to keep a kind of nonchalant attitude about this action between the 2 Jedi, like this is all in a day's work. The third section of this chase is when Anakin leaves the speeder and jumps onto the top of Zam's speeder, which gives a completely different sort of approach to a chase. It ends up roughly in the same kind of situation that we started with, which in the beginning it was Obi-Wan hanging off of a assassin droid, and in the end it's Anakin hanging off a speeder. I like the idea of having a kind of a symmetry to sequences like this, and going back and forth between the 2 characters of one being right and then the other one being right, and one sort of seeming foolish and then the other one-upping him and that sort of thing.
The other way. Once again, you've proved. If you'll excuse me.
Digital Anakin falling.
I hate it when he does that.
Digital Anakin.
And then we cut to real Hayden. So he's shot in front of blue screen and rotoscoped, which means they paint out all around him, and then he's blended in the scene. He's right back into digital again. This section, he's actually lying on the real vehicle that was shot in Sydney on a gimbal rig, which means it's a big mechanical rig that allows us to pitch and roll the vehicle so that Hayden could slide around on it. And meanwhile, the character Zam is inside the vehicle, turning and reacting to George's direction of whether she's banking to the left or the right or she's diving. And Hayden is doing all of these stunts himself. The gimbal rocking back and forth and us shooting him from all these different angles.
Here we have Zam doing a transformation just for about a second or so. Computer-generated face.
George did that on purpose. He wanted to be short enough that some people in the audience weren't sure what they saw. That was sort of the goal for that.
And we put little things in here. There's a thematic bit of humor that goes through the whole movie of the Jedis keep losing their lightsabers. Later on, Obi-Wan will give this little speech to Anakin about how important the lightsaber is, but As it turns out, everybody starts losing their lightsabers before too long. I like chase sequences. I have a fondness for racing, and I inevitably put something like a chase sequence in every movie, in one form or another, or a racing scene or something. It's just, I love speed, and I love the tension and excitement of a chase.
This was interesting. I remember they had the cameras basically hanging from a big rope or cable, didn't they? They were just spinning.
The camera was on a dolly, and the camera was just panning around as the characters ran in a 360-degree circle around them. We had a partial set, and there were a few blue areas, but most of it was set.
And then filled up with extras. And then when you see it, it looks like they're running in a straight line.
We shot this sequence in a day. We only built one side of the set, and then we replicated it onto the other side. Everything in the background was done at ILM with miniatures.
I particularly like the advertising sign in that shot. Two aliens arguing about different flavors.
She runs into a kind of sports bar, a gambling casino. I wanted to do a variation on the theme of the cantina. Decided I didn't really want to use a musical motif in here, but wanted to let the score, Johnny Williams, build the suspense of the sequence as they tried to find the bounty hunter in the middle of the crowd.
This is a nightclub scene that I got the opportunity to cast all the lovely women in the scene. There were a lot of extras. We had about 125 people in the sequence.
When you create sound for a scene like the sports bar that Obi-Wan and Anakin walk into, it's important that you create all the necessary layers of sound and put them together to form the right impression without any one thing jumping out and seeming to be artificially too loud. But it's an ensemble of sounds which gives it the subtle reality. I remember I spent a day or so just pretending I was a sports announcer, announcing the different sporting events that they see on the screens, and I wrote out a fake play-by-play of these mythical games here.
This was originally a non-visual effect shot, but George decided that he wanted to have a glowing death stick in his hand, so we added that. Then he decided he wanted to have antennas on the character's head, so we put those in there. And then he decided that once we had the antennas there, that it didn't make sense for him to have ears, so we got rid of his ears.
There was an early version of this sports bar scene in which it was actually played up more as a nightclub. And at one point, the idea was that there might be a band present playing. And we may cut to the band or the performers. And the idea, although was appealing to me, George felt that it may echoed too closely the classic cantina sequence.
So Anthony Daniels, the actor portraying C-3PO throughout the series, makes a cameo appearance here. Right here is Anthony Daniels.
There he is again over Anakin's shoulder, turns back. Yet another in the series of Star Wars severed limbs. I've actually tried to talk to George about the whole reason for the severed limbs in these movies, and he always just sort of smiles and chuckles and never gives me the real answers.
I use recurring themes in the movies. I'm constantly taking the same motif and twisting it into a different way. In this case, the cantina scene from New Hope is reminiscent of this scene, where in that scene, Obi-Wan cuts off the arm of somebody who's threatening Luke. This one, it's Obi-Wan cuts off the arm of the bounty hunter. Very similar to what he does later on in A New Hope.
Back in the alley, we have a handful of shots where we needed to do a transformation. Zam is really an alien, artificially taking human form, and as she dies, she reverts back to her original shape.
In this case, we're matching the performance of the actress on the day when she was actually falling back. We had to match in a three-dimensional face, both the human version of it and then the alien version of it, and we did a 3D morph to the alien face.
This scene coming up is a scene that kind of came late in the editing process, in the sense that this is the Jedi Temple, and we are actually using plates that were shot for Episode 1. So everything that you see over here in terms of the background is shot for Episode 1. And then we had to remove some characters and put new characters in. Sam had to be shot, obviously for this scene, and then Anakin and Obi were shot on blue screen and then recombed over backgrounds that we already had. So in a sense, we are basically, marrying film and HD and also computer graphics.
This scene was actually added later after I had my first cut. It's one of those scenes that you don't like to write, but ultimately you have to. It's the scene that kind of explains what's going on and who's going to go where. It's kind of a logistic scene.
From an editorial standpoint, the scene between Anakin and Palpatine came about a year or so into the editing. It was not a scene that was part of the original scenario. But as things developed with the story, it became evident that it would help a great deal to establish a direct connection between Palpatine and Anakin, and that there was a relationship there that was private and not perhaps even known to the other Jedis or anyone else.
I had all these hints that Palpatine had been helping Anakin, but I needed an explicit scene that actually spelled it out, and where you could see some of Anakin's dialogue later on has come from Palpatine.
This sequence was added late in the production of the film. We needed a moment when Mace and Obi-Wan and Yoda were talking about Anakin. We realized right away that there's no way that Yoda's going to be able to keep up to them. Yoda, being small and being old, can only walk so fast, and it was really going to restrict the two actors to full-size men in terms of how they were moving down that hallway. So George came up with the idea of putting him in this little hovering chair.
It's very difficult to put a tall person and a short person together in the same shot. The camera angles either become very high or very low and are not really particularly flattering or dramatically interesting.
Establishing shots are just to remind you really where you are. You saw in that last shot that you actually see the window being replaced from the previous night when Obi-Wan jumps out of the window. It crashes and breaks.
This is where the plot thickens with Jar Jar. Since Padme has to leave, she gives her second in command, the representative of Naboo, Jar Jar Binks, orders to watch after things and represent Naboo in the Senate, which ultimately leads to a more difficult situation.
I do not like this idea of hiding.
Don't worry. Now that the Council has ordered an investigation, it won't take Master Obi-Wan long to find this bounty hunter.
This scene in the bedroom is the first real scene between Anakin and Padme. We get to see that Anakin is frustrated with Obi-Wan, and you get to see him sort of be a young bratty kid, but then at the same time have an underlying strength and an underlying flirtation and a little bit of danger in him that is just beneath the surface. He's both very shy and awkward, and then at the same time kind of bold and strong and angry and frustrated. So I'm trying to play those two qualities in Anakin at this point, just really establish the complexities of his character of being young and wanting and having a lot of love for Obi-Wan, but at the same time being extremely frustrated with being held back and impatient with his progress as a Jedi. I also wanted to establish that Padme was still kind of the older of the two, and that she was a little bit more in charge than Anakin. Even though Anakin has grown up, she's still the boss.
You said it yourself.
Please don't look at me like that.
Why not?
It makes me feel uncomfortable.
Sorry, milady.
So we had a miniature of this dock that the ship's landing in, but the ship is computer graphics.
Interior of the bus is full scale.
But we only had the back part of it. So there's two shots coming up here where we see the front of the bus, and we built a extension for it.
I'll be fine.
It's a bit of a transitional scene to establish that Padme's handmaiden is going to impersonate her while she's gone, and they're going to hope that nobody realizes it. Mostly this scene is, again, one of those functional scenes where we have to split the parties up. Everybody has their little assignment. We have to know where everybody's going.
This is a sequence that we shot on a stationary set. We had just built the interior of the transport carrier. It's a very pivotal moment in the film. You can see in Anakin the anxiety that he has about going out and setting out on his first real assignment.
Many scenes like this are mostly functional in nature, and you hope that you can make a few jokes or liven things up to keep it entertaining as you get through them.
Don't worry, we have our two with us.
And in this case, we have the foreboding of which of the two younger characters are going to cause the most trouble as far as the Jedi and the security people are concerned. I had to do a scene somewhere and to have him get this information from this character who had been sort of all around the galaxy. So I wanted to do a little homage to American Graffiti and have it be in a diner.
So here he is, the introduction to Dexter. He's a short order cook. These guys are clearly old friends. Kind of holding back. We know that he's in the kitchen. It's not until this next shot when he comes out of the kitchen that we realize he's got 4 arms. He's got a wonderful character in his walk, which we took right from the voice actor. And then this shot, he's actually hugging Obi-Wan. So Obi-Wan is digital from the neck down. And this is a nice scene. Oh, the effort of him sitting down, the weight in his body. And our two friends have their conversation. Moments like this are wonderful for animators because we're able to share this screen with Ewan McGregor, with Obi-Wan, and to have this nice rapport between these two characters, and yet one of them isn't even there. Ronald Falk was the voice actor for this character. He brought a character in his voice and in his rehearsal, because he would shoot him in this booth. This whole set was actually there in Sydney. And Ronald would sit and rehearse this with Ewan, and I would watch and pick up on all the little nuances, all the way he shook his shoulders when he laughed, or the way he slapped his hand on the table, the way he turned and followed Obi-Wan's hand in this particular shot. And we blended that in and made that part of Dexter's repertoire. There was a wonderful chemistry between them. You can see that Ewan is genuinely enjoying himself here. You know, these are old friends in the story, but he was clearly keying off of what this other actor was bringing to the performance. And because of that chemistry, I was really able to make Dexter come to life. Now, Ronald, thank God, didn't have a huge bullfrog cheek like this, but that was something that was part of the design that I really wanted to bring to this character. Steve Rollins was our lead animator on this section and did a fabulous job setting the tone of how these airbag would fill and deflate as the character talked.
On how good your manners are. How big your pocketbook is.
In this sequence, you can see a bunch of very familiar people there right here, the bust. Like, for instance, the fourth bust, it's George. And then behind George is Rob Coleman.
So these are all famous Jedi, right?
Yeah, of course.
Jedi
yes.
Masters.
There is Rob Coleman.
Oh my gosh. That's the first time I ever knew that was in there.
Right in front of Rob Coleman, there's George. I don't think George knew about this.
Did you put me in there?
Yes.
I appreciate that.
There's also John Knoll, and there is me, and there is Brian Gernan, who is our mall supervisor.
Someone in the Jedi Order has been hiding this whole system from the Jedi archives. It does come out eventually in the next movie, exactly what's behind all this. But I wanted to have it there in this movie, but not so strongly that you asked a lot of questions about who is the one that erased the tapes and who started the army and how all that works, because it's something that unfortunately doesn't get revealed until the third film.
Hey, you, no droids. Get out of here.
Intercutting Obi-Wan's mystery and searching for the killer with Anakin and Padme, which is a rather passive thing, gave me a chance to tell this love story, which is what I call love story light. I only had a few scenes available to me to kind of establish their feelings for one another and go from the kind of formality of the first scene they had together in the apartment to the more familiar scenes that are coming up later. This is kind of a transitional scene where Padme first gets the idea that Anakin's intentions really are more serious than she thought, because when he reveals that he has been dreaming about her a lot and thinking about her a lot over the last 10 years in slightly romantic ways, it causes them both a bit of embarrassment.
Here, Obi-Wan approaches the training veranda, walking through a miniature set, matte painting extension. This scene was very difficult to do, much more difficult than you'd expect. On the day when we were shooting the plates, we had 14 children to shoot, and it's very difficult to get 14 sort of 4 and 5-year-old children to sit still for even a moment or two, let alone to shoot a scene of this length. So the first few shots are very much patched together from multiple takes, so we could get the performances all to be reasonable. So it's a patchwork from what we shot in Sydney. Then there's a number of computer-generated kids that were added after the aliens, just to get the performances to all be consistent throughout. For the Alien Jedi, we shot a live-action body, and then we just did head and hand replacement for those. So my son Alex is all of the Alien Jedi.
From the neck down.
From the neck down. And my daughter Jane is the character on the left, closest to Yoda.
How can this be? A thought? Anyone?
Master? Because someone erased it from the archive memory.
Truly wonderful the mind of a child is.
I wanted to show that Yoda trains the younger Jedi, and when he finishes training them, then they go on to be mentored by a specific Jedi as a Padawan learner. Yoda didn't really get a chance to train Anakin in this way because he was too old. I wanted to be very careful not to have Yoda sort of speaking in bumper sticker speak, which is just these little short quips of wisdom. In the first film, in Empire Strikes Back, he is funny. He's a very playful, mischievous little character. Even when he's serious, he has this kind of wry sense of humor.
This next shot is an establishing shot in Naboo. Now, it's a very interesting shot in the sense that we didn't want to show Naboo Fit City the same way that we had shown it on episode 1. So this shot took about 4 or 5 months to do.
So when we land at Naboo, I wanted to, again, establish Naboo and remind us where we are in the larger context. And I also wanted to set up in this little scene with Anakin and Padme that these are all elected officials and that they have a term of office. And she had a term of office. And even though the people wanted her to stay, she didn't stay. This is in contrast to Palpatine, who also has a term of office, but has managed to stay because of one crisis or another. And this film, even gets more power. It also begins to establish that she normally would have retired and probably gone off and had kids at the after becoming queen, but that she'd been pressed back into service. That it wasn't really her choice. She was asked to serve, and so she did.
Federations or the commerce guilds for help.
It's outrageous. But after 4 trials in the Supreme Court, Newt Gunray is still the Viceroy of the Trade Federation. I fear the Senate is powerless to resolve this crisis.
We must keep our faith in the Republic.
This is the Caserta Palace just outside of Naples. We shot there both on episode 1 and episode 2. One of our favorite actors is a guy named Oliver Ford Davis. Unfortunately, at that particular time, he was shooting another film and he was also in a play. This shot was actually shot 9 months after he completed the film on a blue screen stage, and we comped him into the whole action because we wanted him to be there. But him standing up and walking across was done in a blue screen stage months later. I sent a production assistant down to measure the actual depth of the stairs, and we recreated blue screen stairs on the stage, which allowed him to be able to actually walk and finish the sequence and take his first step on the stairs.
It's settled then.
We don't really know how people travel through space long distances, and now we know. They just use hyperdrive.
The plan was that George wanted him to have a small ship, but then there was discussion of whether that small ship could actually go at, supersonic or faster than supersonic.
Yeah,
they could travel at light speed. So we added that extra drive on top of it.
And then we're right into Kamino, and this is the first time that we see the city on stilts on top of the water.
Kamino is a place of great sound contrasts. Outside of Topeka City is a raging storm in the sky and at sea, which is, of course, a sound editor's delight. But inside the city, it is very quiet and very muted.
Master Jedi, the Prime Minister is expecting you.
I'm expected?
So here we are on Kamino, and we're introduced for the first time to Tanwi. Kaminoans were special to us. We're not sure as an audience whether these are good characters or bad characters. There's a serene quality to them that I wanted to get into the performance that started off in how George directed the voice actors. And I wanted to carry that on into, from what I took from the design, see how she walks in. We were paying attention to fashion models. We were thinking about Tai Chi. See how the movement of the arms are fluid, how the hands pass through. And then you'll always see when they come to a stop, there's a little extra flourish in their hands and their movement. It's fluid, and yet it's realistic. And because the way the clothing works so successfly, as with all of the digital characters, I'm always looking for live action reference, live action moments for me out of classic films, out of moments that I've seen before. And it's amazing. I come back to Alec Guinness and I look at how he interacted as an actor, as a character on the screen with other actors. There's a simplicity to the way that he performed.
I'm sorry, it's Master...
Jedi Master Cypher Diaz is still a leading member of the Jedi Council, is he not?
Master Cypher Diaz was killed almost 10 years ago.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. But I'm
There's a nice moment here between Lamassu, this character, and Ewan McGregor. Just subtle things that the animator brought to the hand gestures. There's going to be a moment here when it brushes his knee, and he hears the news of Cypher Diaz dying. This moment here just brushes his knee.
This army is for the Republic.
It's nothing that George would ask for when we're setting the scenes up, but it's an extra level of acting and realism that an animator will bring to it. So in this case, Sean Curran just felt that it felt realistic for the character to do it then, and I agreed with him.
Now we come to a secluded little lake retreat, obviously designed for the ultimate in romantic environment, which is where we're going to have Anakin and Padme fall in love. I wanted something, just ultra lush, ultra romantic, and fell upon this particular setting in Lake Como when I was on vacation and was actually in the process of writing the script and just said, well, this is it. This is the place.
There was the possibility of some nice romantic chemistry developing between Anakin and Padme on the balcony overlooking the lake. And when the scene was cut together, there was a moment where Anakin moved his hand from the railing and put it on her bare back and actually made physical contact, although he hadn't done it that way, it would have felt more natural had he touched her hand first before putting his hand on her back. And so ILM very cleverly filmed a hand doing the appropriate action at the right camera angle, and they were able to rotoscope that hand, essentially attach it to Anakin's wrist, such that he touched her hand first and then her back.
When he starts touching her back and touching her arm and she doesn't really respond and say, take your hands off me, it signals to him that possibly he can make a move. It's something I wanted to do without a lot of talking about. I wanted to be one of those kind of magical moments.
Very impressive.
I'd hoped you would be pleased.
This is one of those scenes that I just felt sorry for Ewan McGregor. He showed up one day and he was put into a completely blue room. There was nothing there whatsoever. We rehearsed the scene with the two voice actors, so they would be walking along in the blue room with him, and so that he could figure out how fast should he be walking and what is he looking at and what would be at the windows that weren't really there on the day.
Oh yes, it's essential. Otherwise a mature clone would take a lifetime to grow. Now we can do it in half the time.
I see.
It wasn't until I started working on this script that I decided to make Boba the son of the original clone. Before, he was just another clone who was, for whatever reason, had sort of broken loose from the stormtroopers. I didn't really go into detail at that point, even in my mind or in the backstory about any more of it other than that they were connected. But early on, the stormtroopers were meant to be clones. In turning and making Boba the son, it adds more character ultimately to Jango, because I wanted to create a villain in this one that had a little bit of heart, had a little bit of sentimentality to him. It wasn't just Darth Maul all evil. So this gave me the opportunity to do that, and at the same time kind of explore the idea of where Boba Fett came from. Started out as a tiny sort of side character and has now grown into something much larger.
This is our first chance to really realize, oh my gosh, these clone troopers are really stormtroopers. Then there's that fantastic shot of the clones all marching, which becomes such a Star Wars moment for me.
Magnificent, aren't they?
And this next coming shot is a very long shot. It's about, 15 seconds or something like that. And while they were talking, there was all these bugs around them. And we had to remove every one of them. And the way to do that is to paint them by hand. You have to paint them out. So we spent weeks trying to get those bugs out of around them.
One of the funny problems of mixing a film is, of course, reconciling reality with what you want to hear. Anakin and Padme are sitting just a few hundred feet away from a gigantic thundering waterfall. Basically, they couldn't hear themselves having this nice little intimate conversation. So although we do our duty and we create the sound of the waterfall and it's there in the original tracks, the decision to reduce it and eventually just get rid of it is made in the final mix.
The scene in the field, I wanted to have one scene kind of outdoors. We've been inside a lot. We know we have a lot of waterfalls on Naboo. I wanted to make a kind of super waterfall scene, have something really, really gorgeous outdoor. So we have this little picnic where Anakin brings out the uncomfortable subject of previous boyfriends, which boys have a tendency to do. And then we get into this political discussion, which allows us to get a little insight into Anakin and Palpatine's influence over Anakin and some of his thought process. Anakin realizes here that he's gone a little bit too far with her and then turns it into a joke.
So I think the most difficult thing about this sequence, besides those first two shots with waterfalls, which are beautiful shots, is how we integrate these animals that are called the shacks, which we hadn't seen before. Actually, we saw them before in episode 1.
They were tiny. Yeah, they were in episode 1, but they were tiny. They were just before the ground battle begins on Naboo.
Right.
George really wanted to have this action shot of Anakin riding the back of the shack, and I knew on the day in Sydney when we shot him, this was going to be one of the most difficult shots. Little did I know it was going to become probably the most difficult shot in terms of animation to making believable.
I wanted to do a goofy little scene where they get to roll around in the grass, which allows them to get a little bit more physically close to each other without that romantic edge. It's got a slight undercurrent of romance, but it's more of an innocent, playful friendship thing. The air whale is something also that's been left over from a long time ago, from the first trilogy, and this was the perfect place to put it, which is on this ocean planet. It's nothing but ocean. I wanted to create in this introduction to Boba and Jango Fett a lot of tension. Obi-Wan comes in to the apartment. He knows that this is the guy he's looking for immediately. Jango knows why the Jedi is there immediately. And there's this underlying reality that is betrayed by their sort of cordial behavior to one another.
Jango, welcome back. Was your trip productive?
Fairly.
This is Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi. He's come to check on our progress.
Your clowns are very impressive. You must be very proud. I'm just a simple man trying to make my way in the universe. Ever made your way as far into the interior as Coruscant?
I made the dialogue here very clipped and kind of stark. I made the editing kind of short and kind of a fast pace. I didn't linger on things. I kept things a little brisk here purposely to kind of give this sense that there's a lot of tension.
Master who? Cypher-Dias.
Did Obi-Wan actually see Jango's rocket suit or not? That is the question. In the original dailies for the scene, Ewan McGregor's eyes do flash over and see something and then come back on to Jango. So it was apparent to me that he did look past Jango and see that rocket suit. But if one assumes that Obi-Wan did see the rocket suit, why didn't he just draw his lightsaber at that very moment and arrest Jango? The solution to this problem was to keep it ambiguous. You do notice that Obi-Wan does give a little look toward the rocket suit when we're over on the back of Obi-Wan's head. And Jango tells Boba to go close the door. And that was not part of the original concept of the scene.
What is it, Dad?
Pack your things. We're leaving.
This was the very first set that we actually built in Australia. We had an English plasterer come in, and we had an English painter come in who were used to using wallpaper to create the marble effect. But it wasn't something that the Australian crew was used to. So it took an enormous time to actually get the patina right.
The scene, this little eating scene, is designed to, again, just get them casually back into a situation where we can set up the next scene in the fireplace. Him using the Force to cut fruit and stuff, he's, again, refers back to his little tension with Obi-Wan and that he's not doing what he's supposed to be doing. You also see in her that she's attracted to him just by the way she looks at him. But then we get to the real scene. This is one of the pivotal scenes in their relationship, where he reveals the pain and suffering that he's been going through this whole time, ever since the first time he laid eyes on her again. But obviously, even before that, as he's dreamed about her over the years. He lets himself go here. It's intended to be overly dramatic, sort of almost even overly operatic in its emotional intensity on his part. He's young, and he's kind of spilling his guts out to her. She doesn't quite know how to deal with this, and it's putting her kind of on the spot. But she ultimately will refuse here to go along with him, which, again, is a pivotal moment for the rest of the film.
Have given me.
There was quite a bit of split screen in this scene. Many of these angles between the two of them on the couch, in order to favor certain takes and certain performances, Anakin and Padme were split out quite frequently, and the best parts of performances, either on the left or the right-hand side of the screen, were used. And this is just something you can do digitally successfully now. And as an editor, you aren't necessarily locked into just what the camera recorded in its entirety, but you could hold out the piece that you want and go search for something else in a different take. And then as long as the cameras were pretty much lined up the same, you could then split an image that in from a different take. And in many cases, ILM would need to do a touch-up of a shoulder or an edge of a costume where they might overlap slightly. And they were very adept at doing that. And so it became kind of common practice in putting together even these intimate scenes like this to really search thoroughly through all the performances and concentrating on each actor in their own right and not be as concerned about the ensemble within a shot.
Wish away my feelings, but I can't.
I will not give in to this.
In relation to their emotional maturity, he is much more impetuous and much more immature. She is obviously older and you know, in a professional thing, but a queen and a senator and a leader, so that she's much more reality based on all of this, and can look forward and say what the consequences are of their actions. She's just not going to let her emotions run rampant.
Could you, Anakin? Could you live like that?
No.
Even he realizes that if they did have a relationship, it would lead to doom. There's no way it could work. When she reminds him of where this would lead and what the consequences would be, he does accept it.
Tell your council that the 1st Battalions are ready, and remind them, if they need more troops, it will take more time to grow them.
I won't forget, and thank you.
Thank you.
Should the sound of thunder occur at the moment you see the lightning, or as in real life, occur in a delay afterwards? When this lightning flashes when Obi-Wan comes out on the deck, we delayed the sound to make it correspond a little bit more with reality, rather than what's always been the movie convention of seeing and hearing lightning and thunder at the same moment.
I have successfully made contact with the Prime Minister of Kamino. They are using a bounty hunter named Jango Fett to create a clone army.
This whole aspect of the film, which is the mystery, is based really on a 1940s, film noir mystery, Maltese Falcon, all the great mystery movies of the 30s and 40s is the influence here. I wanted to have that kind of quality of one of those great Raymond Chandler mysteries.
Yes, Master. They say
You got to remember that this whole series of films is based on a 30s genre. On a serial. The acting style is very much from the 30s. Conceptually, it's using the influence and the inspiration of the 30s films as its basis, and the most central of which, obviously, is the Saturday matinee serial.
Bring him here. Question him. We will.
When you're an editor, you have to think of continuity, and you have to kind of think ahead. If Obi-Wan, in fact, is to capture Jango, and I suppose Boba, and bring them back, how is he going to fit them into the Jedi fighter? Are they going to ride in the rumble seat? Are they going to be strapped to the hood? Well, we don't know. So fortunately, we never had to answer that question.
If informed the Senate is, multiply our adversaries' will.
No. No.
Now we get back to Anakin's nightmares about his mother, which was established earlier on in the film and now begins to play itself out, which is his mother and his love for his mother and ultimately his inability to let go of his mother.
Wasn't it pouring rain on the day in Italy when they shot this?
In fact, you can see the rain in the second shot in this sequence on the ground.
They put them under a little shelter and they shot this sequence.
And you can see the rain in the lower left. On the ground, you can see some reflections right there.
So in the day in Italy, it was pouring rain, but they covered up these actors so that we could play it so that it wasn't really raining at that moment.
I don't think we had the need to paint it out.
Yeah, no one's going to notice because we're looking at the actors, we're taking the scene, and although we're always playing with replacing and changing things, we don't always do that because it's not always necessary. So that rain.
And I think also George has a a really good eye for those things. And if he had wanted it out, he would have told us. But he also has he has a good sense of what it is that the audience is looking at. And he thought that probably that wasn't going to be noticed. And the reason why I'm telling you now is because now we are 2 years later and George can make us go back and repaint it.
That's what you think.
She is in pain. I know I'm disobeying my mandate to protect you, Senator, but I have to go. I have to help her.
I'll go with you.
I'm sorry, I don't have a choice.
So now that we're beginning to get this plot going with Anakin and his mother, then when I start to rev up the more action-oriented aspects of Obi-Wan and Jango. I wanted to do a fight that was kind of different than anything we'd done before. One, putting it in the rain was a challenge and something that I thought would give it a lot of quality, the grittiness and the wetness. And we played again a little bit with this, everybody losing their lightsabers, which is a running theme through the movie. And here it allows us to kind of have an old-fashioned fist fight with a Jedi and a Jango. It's sort of the last thing you'd expect between these two. And I didn't want to do the obvious. I wanted to do sort of something that was away from the obvious, which is, in this case, a fist fight.
This was the first time, really, we had a Jedi involved in any kind of physical fight. Up to this point, they've always fought with just a lightsaber. And here was Obi-Wan receiving and giving, body blows and kicks to Jango. It was fun to bring that kind of, well, let's be honest, kind of an Indiana Jones element to the fight scene. A little bit more of a traditional fist-to-cuffs physical fight between hero and villain. Not something you see in the Star Wars films, especially when Jedi are involved.
Oh, not good.
It turns into a kind of fun sequence with them going over the side and the hanging and the cliffhanger part of it, which, again, is in that old Saturday matinee serial aspect of this whole thing. Taking that idea and twisting it, again, to have it be slightly new and fresh. This sequence was designed to show off Jango's suit. We've seen Boba's suit, and I have to use some of Jango's suit later, so I couldn't do everything. I couldn't do the flamethrower, and there's some things I wanted to save for later. But I wanted to use as much of Jango's suit as I could and have some fun with it.
We built the actual platform and a portion of this roof. All this is a model and CG. We actually had rain in the set. We shot this for about 4 days, the fight sequence, Ewan's arrival with the speeder. It was very humid in Australia at that time. Took an enormous amount of logistical support to be able to get that much water out because we covered a massive stage.
When Jango goes up the ramp on the ship, you're going to see that he actually bangs his head. Bang! He hits his head on the door. That's not by accident.
Throughout, as we go through the movie, there's all little funny moments like Jango bumping his head, because in Star Wars, one of the stormtroopers bumps his head on the door as they leave the control room on the Death Star. And I thought, wouldn't it be funny if, that's a trait that Jango has, is when he puts his helmet on and everything, he can't really see that well, and so he's constantly bumping his head, and that trait gets cloned into all the stormtroopers. And that's why they keep bumping their heads and
Back in the streets of Mos Espa, we were able to, of course, utilize much material which had been created for other Star Wars films which came to the same location, the sounds of the voices in the street, the off-screen spaceships and speeders. But a new element was added, which we hadn't quite seen before, and these were the flies around Watto.
Watto?
So Watto is back here. We've aged him a little bit since 10 years have elapsed. We've given him a beard. He has a different wardrobe, got a hat.
But he's still the same old cranky guy. When Watto realizes that this is actually Anakin, the little boy that he hasn't seen in 10 years, there's a lovely moment. Check this out.
Annie? Lani?
And then the reaction.
You are Annie! It is you!
He was always a great character to animate, but do you have him have that kind of an acting moment on screen where he's sustaining everything, the audience is watching and believing in him? That's what we love to do.
Watto was a fun character, and I liked coming back to him and being able to see him a little older, a little bit scruffier, and have this interesting confrontation, which is kind of like going back to a high school reunion where you go back to your old teacher and now you're grown up and successful, get to have that little bit of satisfaction in the fact that you succeeded in life.
Watto was one of my very favorite characters from Phantom Menace. I was very happy to hear when he's going to be put back into this movie. Originally, he wasn't going to make it in episode 2, but myself and John lobbied to get him back into the movie. It's getting into the head of the character, when to scratch his neck and when to scratch his legs and when to tip his hat. These are all acting decisions that we as the animators are making. We're moving his lip sync, and we're moving his lips to create the lip sync, and his nose is flapping around, but we're also making decisions of when is he looking at Anakin, when is he turning, how is he fluttering. We're making all those decisions frame by frame and shot by shot to make this character believable for you.
So what would be Star Wars without a little bit of a space battle? We haven't really had a gunfight between Jango's ship, the Slave One, and anything else. So it was fun to use Jango's ship as a vehicle in one of these little action set pieces.
The asteroid chase was the opportunity in this film for the sound effects to really come to the forefront and be the element in the soundtrack that was carrying the prime responsibility for the entertainment. There's very little dialogue in the asteroid chase, and there's no music. The idea of having silence in the moment that the seismic charge made a flash and then have the sound arrive. It was difficult for me to convince people to try that. The only person who was initially in favor of it was Gary Rydstrom, and he understood what I was trying to do. To those more technical-minded, I said to them, well, imagine that this is a black hole for sound. Just like a black hole in space has such a strong gravitational pull that it pulls in all light so you can't see it, here is the aural equivalent to that, a audio black hole. It creates such a disturbance in the galaxy that it pulls all sound in for just an instant, holds it, and then lets it snap back. It was an audio black hole in space. I was attracted to this sequence as a picture editor, and I felt, as I charted out the sound design for the film, that the asteroid chase might be the opportunity, kind of like the pod race was in episode 1, for the sound effects to have their spotlight. It was also the opportunity, which we hadn't had for quite a while, for just action in space. Something, strangely enough, which doesn't happen as often in the Star Wars films as you may think.
We got him!
We'll just have to finish him.
I originally wanted not to have any music in this sequence until the final cruise missile blows up behind Obi-Wan's ship. It was a little hard to convince George and John Williams to allow the music absence to continue for as long as it did. The compromise was to put the music in and start it when the missile is fired. In the end, that actually is a very good moment for music to come in because it's a transition to a new level in the fight because it gave added energy to the final last lap of the chase, so to speak.
One aspect of the scene that I really liked a lot was the way that Obi-Wan escapes by hiding on the back of the asteroid. Now, this is the same trick that the Millennium Falcon did in Empire Strikes Back, but who is the one person who saw through that trick in Empire Strikes Back was Boba Fett. And why did he see through it? Because he'd seen it before here.
As you land on Geonosis, you see these big round balls, which are really the center, the core of the Trade Federation ships. But when you first see it, it looks like that's the city and that's the world this is. And it's not until later that it's revealed that the city is actually underground and that those funny tall termite mounds are the real cities.
Well, R4, I think we've waited long enough.
These digital matte paintings, as we approached Geonosis, we actually, the base material for this was a series of still photographs we stitched together from, actually shot out the window of a commercial flight over the southwest.
So originally, Obi-Wan didn't get hit by laser fire, so all the little laser hits on the side of the ship were added later.
So it's a full-size ship, and then they painted in all the
battle scars.
All the battle scars.
So now we finally arrive back at Tatooine at the homestead, our favorite location. And this time, I'm able to, I think, show it off a little bit better. We have more scenes outside during the day. It's great, again, that we see it here, and then, in New Hope, we'll see it again. We'll see Luke. And I think when you see the films through in the correct order, it'll have a nice connection between these two scenes.
Back in 1994, Gavin Bouquet, our production designer, and I took a recce through all of Tunisia to try and find the original locations that George had shot in 20 years before. We actually found where the homestead was because this rim that they had built in 1975 actually still existed. So when I brought all of the Australian crew to Tunisia, we were all kind of overwhelmed at the fact that this is where George had shot A New Hope.
We get introduced to Owen Lars and Aunt Beru and this whole connection of Uncle Owen and what is Uncle Owen's relationship, and everything is now revealed. That Uncle Owen is actually Anakin's stepbrother. Again, I've tried to include like the kitchen and a lot of the elements from the other movie to, again, make the connection between the two sequences as strong as I can, even though they're 2 movies away.
We could go inside. We have a lot to talk
The scene with Klieg is designed to really try to get some finality to the fact that Mom is probably gone, but the fact that Anakin won't accept it, and that we also begin to establish that the Tusken Raiders, which we haven't really known up to this point if you're watching it straight through, are not completely human, that they're disliked and treacherous and deadly, and we know them from, again, A New Hope, but if you're watching the film straight through this way, you won't have actually have experienced them other than sort of shooting off guns in the pod race in Episode 1. It's difficult because I'm making a movie backwards and forwards in 6 parts and trying to make this one work unto itself. So there's a lot of explaining and a lot of complex issues that need to get woven into this fabric.
There's something very familiar in terms of cinematography over here. George is playing with different actors reliving the same scenes. Like, for instance, this scene, is similar to the scene at the beginning of Episode 4,
right,
when Luke is talking to
his aunt
right,
and uncle, yeah,
right, and they're basically right there. And it's covering the same angles and things like that. He's doing this on purpose.
He is. He's setting up themes, he's setting up relationships, and he's setting up echoes that are going to pass through all these movies. And he does them very specifically. All right, so Pablo, I have to ask you a question on behalf of the fans. Did you manipulate the shadow on Anakin to make it look like Darth Vader on the wall here? See how it looks kind of like he's got a helmet on? And it's a previous shot as well.
That is a practical element. That is his shadow.
This was meant to be reminiscent of Luke looking out to the stars in the first film. It's meant to give you that sense that there's foreboding and that a little bit of the Darth Vader poster.
There was quite a bit more to the travel montage of Anakin searching for his mother. There was a scene of Anakin coming across an encampment of corpses of the party that had gone out to find her, and they had been wiped out and were laying around in the sand dead. I missed that a bit when it was taken out, but there, once again, it was considerations of how much time it takes him to find her were there.
And then this is where we're kind of, we're going from him at night on Tatooine to Obi-Wan kind of in early morning at dawn on Geonosis, but the feel of what they're going through is very similar.
So we're back with Obi-Wan, who's sort of lurking around on the Geonosis planet. We sort of talked a lot about how the Geonosians, who are the creatures on this planet, came up, how they built these or carved these structures, which George likened to termite mounds. And we did a fair bit of exploration, and actually the design of those things changed a lot. That's sort of more of the termite-y one, and you can sort of see this was a more formal space in the Geonosian architecture. This was a really nicely detailed miniature that ILM Model Shop came up with, and actually a combination of a few different miniatures. What Obi-Wan's looking down at now is the first shot of our droid factory, which we'll be seeing a lot more of later on. This is CG combined with some miniature elements. It was difficult to get the sort of dark sort of feel here, and a lot of the set was missing, so we added a lot of parts to the set with Obi-Wan running around. This is the miniature again with people shot separately, and then several of these creatures are computer graphics combined with the blue screen elements. We also had to do a lot here to darken this, added the thing on the right for Obi-Wan behind. Originally it was quite bright back there, but just to keep it really dark and moody in the sense of him lurking around, spying on these guys.
As I explained to you earlier, I am quite convinced that 10,000 more systems will rally to our cause with your support, gentlemen.
Jango used to be in this scene, standing next to Count Dooku. But it became apparent that we didn't want Obi-Wan to see Dooku and Jango together, because it would have implicated Dooku as the bad guy right away. And George felt it was important to keep Dooku somewhat ambiguous, that there would always be some doubt in the audience's mind as to whether he really did have a better idea for the galaxy. And therefore, it wasn't wise to show Dooku with Jango at that point in the film. As Anakin sneaks up and burns through the tent to find his mother, there's a sound of him burning through the tent, and that is the only real sound recorded on the set for the movie that was kept. And I have to say that I'm proud of that sound because my son, Benny, stood by with the DAT machine and recorded that sound.
This is obviously a very pivotal scene for Anakin, because this is reuniting with his mother and his youth, and at the same time dealing with his inability to let go of his emotions and allow himself to accept the inevitable of the fact that everything must change and things come and go through his life, and that he can't hold on to things, which is a basic Jedi philosophy that he is unwilling to accept emotionally. And the reason that is because he was raised by his mother rather than by the Jedi. If he'd have been taken, in his first year and started to study to be a Jedi, he wouldn't have this particular connection as strong as it is, and he'd been trained to love people but not to become attached to them. But he has become attached to his mother, and he will become attached to Padme. And these things are, for a Jedi who needs to have a clear mind and not be influenced by threats to their attachments, it's a dangerous situation. And it feeds into fear of losing things, which feeds into greed, wanting to keep things and wanting to keep his possessions and things that he could be letting go of. His fear of losing her turns to anger at losing her, which ultimately turns to revenge and wiping out the village. The scene with the Tusken Raiders is the first scene that ultimately takes him on the road to the dark side, and he's been prepping for this, but that's the one where he sort of is doing something that is completely inappropriate. In that scene also, which we don't see, we cut to Yoda, who is meditating, who hears this off screen, and we do hear a voice in there, and that voice is the voice of Qui-Gon Jinn.
Anakin! Anakin! No!
So we very subtly establish that in this rather intense emotional connection that Yoda is feeling the pain and suffering of Anakin and the Tusken Raiders, he's also making a connection unwittingly with Qui-Gon Jinn. And up to this point, we haven't really established that you can make a connection with the departed in this world. And that will become a factor in the next one. Lots of issues sort of come out of that. But this is the very beginning of that, Yoda making a connection with Qui-Gon Jinn in the middle of Anakin's pain.
Young Skywalker, being pain. Terrible pain.
So originally the antenna that was on the ship here was built from a vegetable steamer. And in the end, we decided it was a little too obviously derived from a vegetable steamer. So we built a CG model of something that was a little bit more antenna-like. So it's replaced with the CG throughout the sequence.
We had at one time a scene where after Obi-Wan leaves his Jedi fighter, Geonosians come down and abuse poor R4, the robot. They pull him out of his ship and kick him around and generally cause him great stress while Obi-Wan was away. It was a funny idea, but it didn't quite fit into the storyline. I had thought that fourth pillar in the arena, which is unoccupied, would have been a great place to have R4 tied up, along with the rest of our heroes for torture or to be devoured by the monsters. It would have been very cruel to kill a robot. You can kill humans, but boy, a robot, no one would allow that. Our rating would go to, NC-17 if we did that.
I'm struggling always to include R2 and give him something to do and make him a pivotal character, to be a vital part of the story so that, he's in lots of different ways a hero and a key player.
Retransmit this message to Coruscant.
Well, I like this scene quite a bit of him returning home. It tells you, again, we're building toward his revelation that he kind of went over the dark side and is upset about it. But seeing his dead mother as he carries her off the speeder bike, seeing the look on his face, it's not that the mother dies and then we just sort of go on to something else. The mother dies, and I have 4 scenes, a great deal in the movie actually centers around him dealing with this death, and his anger about it and his sadness.
This scene is a very emotional scene, and it's very emotional also, I'm sure, for the fans, because they're very familiar with the garage.
I remember walking onto this set and also walking onto the set of the kitchen. And I got goosebumps because I'd seen it in images, of course, for years and years and years, and then actually be standing there. And it was important for us to see the blue milk. We all love the blue milk from the original movies, and there it is sitting on the tray. So we're back.
That's where, Luke is putting together C-3PO and R2.
Of course, Luke will be in here years and years later.
And so we had to be very respectful of what was it that we saw out of these garage doors. This, behind Anakin is a blue screen, and behind Padme is a blue screen. And what we see in there are matte paintings of different vehicles.
Someday I will be the most powerful Jedi ever. I promise you.
The scene in the garage here, we begin to see that What he's really upset about is the fact that he's not powerful enough. That if he had more power, he could have kept his mother, and he could have saved her, and she could have been in his life. That relationship could have stayed there if he'd have been just powerful enough. He's greedy in that he wants to keep his mother around. He's greedy in that he wants to become more powerful in order to control things, in order to keep the things around that he wants. There's a lot of connections here with the beginning of him sliding into the dark side. And it also shows his jealousy and anger at Obi-Wan and blaming everyone else for his inability to be as powerful as he wants to be, which he here swears he will be. So here he sort of lays out his ambition, and you'll see later on his ambition and his dialogue here is the same as Dooku's. He says, I will become more powerful than any Jedi. You'll hear later on Dooku will say, I have become more powerful than any Jedi. So you're going to start to see everybody saying the same thing. And Dooku is kind of the fallen Jedi who was converted to the dark side because the other Fifth Lord didn't have time to start from scratch. And so we can see that that's where this is going to lead, which is that it is possible for a Jedi to be converted. It is possible for a Jedi to want to become more powerful and control things. Because of that, and because he was unwilling to let go of his mother, because he was so attached to her, he committed this terrible revenge on the Tusken Raiders. The key part of this scene ultimately is Anakin saying, I'm not going to let this happen again. We're cementing his determination to become the most powerful Jedi. The only way you can really do that is to go to the dark side, because the dark side is more powerful. If you want the ultimate power, you really have to go to the stronger side, which is the dark side. But ultimately it would be your undoing. But it's that need for power, the need for power in order to satisfy your greed to keep things, to not let go of things and allow the natural course of life to go on, which is that things come and go, and to be able to accept the changes that happen around you and not want to keep moments forever frozen in time.
I wasn't strong enough to save you, Mom. I wasn't strong enough. I promise I won't fail again.
There's a constant echoing back and forth of things. Where Anakin's mother died, or where she's buried, one can assume that Owen and Beru were buried in the same place.
R2? What are you doing here?
It seems that he is...
It's been a tradition since the very first Star Wars film was released to make scene transitions often using wipes. And this was most certainly George's idea. The inspiration for these wipes comes from their use in the classic serials in the golden era of Hollywood. And I think the wipe is somewhat associated with the pulp style that these films are emulating. The wipes are all 32 frames long. And as to the design of the wipe, on the two films that I've worked on as an editor, it's been up to the editor to pick one and give it a try and show George. There is a logic to what wipe you choose, because you're looking at an outgoing image and then it's replaced with an incoming image. And depending on where you want the eye to go, you want to direct your attention to something in motion or something that enters frame on one side or the other. And so there is a logic as to what kind of wipe you would put in order to keep a smooth flow of visual information.
That is your first priority.
The assumption here is the Jedi, in their sort of more mature wisdom, have a sense of how much danger that Obi-Wan is in, and will eventually go and deal with it. But they don't see him as in imminent danger, where the kids do. So the kids kind of jump off immediately to impatiently go after him, and the others wait to kind of get a feel for the situation and what is actually going on. That's why Yoda says there's more going on there than we know at this point, which is a way of saying that you really shouldn't jump in there until you actually know what's going on.
Come along.
I'm not worried, R2. It's just I've never flown before.
Common skills of preparing for war, there can be no doubt.
Jar Jar in this movie is kind of plays a pivotal kind of character because he is the one who sets up the army.
Yeah, it actually happens in this scene. This was a much longer scene, and originally Jar Jar had a little soliloquy at the end here to Palpatine. Clearly, there's mind tricks going on here, and as we, the audience, are sort of going along for the ride at the same time that Jar Jar is. There's a couple shots here where he's trying to figure out, much like he was doing in episode 1, trying to figure out what's going on. And here, Masamita and Palpatine are having a discussion of, it would be great if Padme were here. And Jar Jar's thinking, and we leave him there thinking, and then presumably when we come back and we see him presenting to the Senate that Jar Jar's made the leap, well, with Padme not here, I'll step up and I'll be the senator from Naboo, which causes the creation of the Clone War.
And of course, the creation of episode 3 and 4.
Exactly.
This dungeon scene was not originally part of the shoot. This is something that George added after he'd gotten a rough cut of the movie together.
This is a mistake, a terrible mistake. They've gone too far. This is madness.
I thought you were the leader here, Dooku.
This had nothing to do with me, I assure you.
The confrontation between Obi-Wan and Dooku originally was a confrontation between Padme and Dooku, and it was a political thing. And I decided after seeing the movie that I didn't need that scene with Padme and Dooku. It was in the wrong part of the picture. And this one with Obi-Wan would be more appropriate, and it would work better if Dooku would actually tell the truth about what was going on and then create a situation where nobody believed him. And it also allows you to kind of have some sympathy for Dooku in that he carries the sympathies of most of the Jedi, which is that the Senate is corrupt and it's incapable of carrying on any meaningful actions because they argue about everything all the time. I accentuate that by introducing Darth Sidious again. Darth Sidious we refer to in the first film, and he's a hologram, and we see a little tiny bit of him. But I needed at this point to say there is a Darth Sidious, especially if you haven't seen the first film. I needed to identify that there is a Darth Sidious who is behind all of this, and who is the same Darth Sidious that was in league with the Trade Federation in the last movie. It's really important to set up for the very end scene here where Darth Tyrannus and Darth Sidious come together in the end and realize who's behind all of this.
That the Republic was now under the control of the Dark Lord of the Sith.
No, that's not possible.
Ewan's hanging off of wires here that we've painted out, and then we've added this force field effect around him. So this force field effect was made by having a big field of particles that stream from one of the emitters to another and flows around a computer-generated shape of Ewan. So George wanted to make it look like the force field effect around Ewan was concentrated around the manacles at his wrists and ankles. You can see the force field sort of bunches up around there.
He came to me for help. He told me everything.
Every time there's a little tiny spark of energy flowing over Obi-Wan's body, sound editor Teresa Ecton cut in a little bit of a spark sound that I made. I had to just make one sound. I might have made 2 or 3 versions of this little sparking sound. But she sat there and meticulously cut every one of those little blue flashes. And it gives a reality to this force beam in which Obi-Wan is suspended.
I love this next shot here. This is a digital set. There's no carpet, there's no lighting, there's no building. It's Sam walking through a blue screen set, and everything in there was done on a computer, and it's a fantastic 3D set. For us to have built that, we just would have never had the resources at the time. We probably would have spent $150,000, maybe $175,000 to be able to create that hallway. And to be able to do that, Paul Houston did that in about 3 weeks on a computer, and it was just a fantastic job.
This idea of a democracy being given up, and in many cases being given up in a time of crisis. You see it throughout history, whether it's Julius Caesar or Napoleon or Adolf Hitler. You see these democracies under a lot of pressure, in a crisis situation, who end up giving up a lot of the freedoms they have and a lot of the checks and balances to somebody with a strong authority to help get them through the crisis. It's not the first time a politician has created a war to try to stay in office.
To counter the increasing threats of the Separatists.
It is done, then.
So at this point is when the sort of end of the movie starts. This is like the climax. It starts, and it's ultimately wall-to-wall action and suspense. And it really, once everybody says, I'm going here, you're going there, and Palpatine gets unlimited powers, we're able to follow our heroes into the heart of the dragon cave.
We had at one time a scene where Obi-Wan and Padme fire a wire across an abyss and swing across together. It very much recalls the fun of the first Star Wars, and they were quite charming in the scene because she had to, hang on to him, and he had trouble getting the cable across. It kind of bounces off the first time, and he has to reel it in and shoot it a second time, and she's kind of like, Jedi, huh?
Look, whatever happens out there.
We, again, reiterate this particular relationship where they've come to an accommodation with each other in terms of her being in charge of things and him going along with it. He's sort of given up fighting her. So they're much more able to work as a team and be together and help each other here. They're not romantically linked, but they're, in terms of a working relationship and friendship, they're linked and partners.
So this steam vent that they've landed in is the big factory steam vent. And in this shot, this is mostly a big miniature that Brian Grenan's miniature crew did for the film with the CG ship and this door's CG. But they did a lot of really great miniature work for a lot of the movie, and we used that in most of the shots for the droid factory in some form or another.
So as we go into the creepy part of the movie, I am able to get R2 and 3PO to follow along, and we're into this more traditional R2 and 3PO relationship with the main characters, which didn't exist up to this point. And obviously R2, again, is the leader of this group, and R2 feels that he can help them, and he can solve problems, and he can save their lives, and ultimately he does.
Please wait. Do you know where you're going?
So here we are in the sleeping chamber. The whole idea, of course, was that they don't know that they've just walked into the lair filled with this Geonosian workers. We had a lot of fun animating this. There are alcoves that you can't really see. They're up above them and down below them. There's little tunnels that we've put in there. We wanted to be really creepy for the audience, and I think we achieved that. There's this sense of this darkness, but then it's just filled with all this living creatures.
I thought this would be a fun little piece. Fall back to the rock people in Flash Gordon where they come out of rocks. It's a little homage to that idea.
In planning this, I went through the really good animatics that we had and talked to George and looked at the artworks, but then tried to make sense of it, that each of these conveyor belts that Anakin and Padme are doing things. So they're drilling, in this case, they're drilling and cutting and grinding, and then stamping chest plates for the super battle droids that we get introduced to later on in the arena sequence. So all the machines are actually doing something that makes sense, and it made it a lot clearer when we were talking about animation issues and, what things should look like to actually have it building something. Although it moves so quickly, it's, difficult to tell the progression unless you step through it. So the stages we go through are that we'd sort of plan that out and plan out all the machines that would be happening and do a layout of that and give them to Rob's team, who would then create these machine animations. So this is a CG C-3PO. Actually, he's blue screen up to a certain point, and then he changes to CG. And he was pretty challenging because, everyone knows him and he's, got materials. Just here we changed to a CGR2. And actually there was an idea they were going to play with on the first film, episode 1, of having R2 fly, and they never used that. So this was a good opportunity to have R2 flying. This one was just chaos, and George has likened it to some of his early abstract films because it is so fast.
Some of these sequences, especially with Anakin, have become almost abstract. The visuals are so intense in this environment with the flying sword and everything. It becomes almost a visual tone poem.
To get the real interaction between Padme and the creature, we actually had a stunt performer in a blue suit really moving around that way, and then we match animated to that performance, and I think it really sells the physical interaction between live and computer graphics.
We wanted to get this feeling of Padme going off basically towards hell almost. It was really to get the red sense. Now, this is pretty much entirely CG. C-3PO is all CG here, and the background and everything CG. For this sequence, the way I really wanted to get a sense of different places in the factory, and so each area had a different feel. The machines were different, and the lighting was different. This is more of a neutral sort of fluorescent type lighting, just to really make it clear to everyone, okay, we're in this part of the factory now, and we're in the other part. A lot of the look of the factory was greatly enhanced by Marshall Cross's compositing team because they added all these dust elements. But we, placed with a sort of almost like a Lego toolkit. We called it Lego. It's like a Meccano toolkit or a way of making a model train tracks of the conveyors in the background. So we got all of this background action and just built up layers and layers of action in the factory. The foundry here was another miniature with the cauldrons and the smelting machine that you just saw as computer graphics, and of course R2's computer graphics as well. We shot a sort of goopy backlit methacil element to get the glowing hot molten metal feel. This scene was pretty tricky. I think we struggled a little bit with what was going on here.
We did. There was a lot of back and forth with George on the speed of the conveyor, the number of cutters, what was happening with his arm being pinned down. I remember lots of edits going back and forth.
In this case, we did a lot of work on the miniature later to add smoke elements, and we changed the color of it, and we shot multiple passes of the miniature to allow interactive light from all the hot molten metal that's going around everywhere. So, it's quite tricky. Some of the miniature work itself, it creates problems. Like this shot here we had to shoot in multiple passes because the camera move was so extreme. It was very difficult to nail that down. And then we had to tie it into the original photography of Padme falling out. So this section here was where we had a lot of problems just working out how all the different choppers would work. And after we'd done the first pass, we added some shots of that later on to try and make it more clear what's going on, and Anakin's lightsaber's being chopped.
Not again.
In the shot coming up, we cut back to the factory set here and those great Geonosians. And this is a digital double of Jango. Originally there was a blue screen, but because he had to do such a jump, and Rob was game to do it as a digital double shot, we decided to try it and he's a CG guy.
Reel 6 begins the climax of the movie in many ways. Reel 6 traditionally in Star Wars is that 20 minutes of continuous climactic action which caps off the drama. And it's marked editorially by several parallel battles or stories all taking place at once, and you're intercutting back and forth between them. It's also the point where any restraints on sound and music are let go, and you almost have 100% dialogue, 100% sound effects, and 100% music from now until the end of the reel. And this is always the biggest challenge for us because not only is it the most difficult reel from a sound standpoint to pull off as being clear and articulate and, not just a wall of annoying sound, but also the opticals and special effects come in last on this scene because they're always left to the last moment. And this reel never is settled down editorially until the last minute, and we have to deal with changes.
I remember when we had our first meeting with Doug Chiang and he showed us that little mock-up that sat on the table. It was about 2 feet by 2 feet. And I remember looking into it and thinking, oh my gosh, how are we going to do this? And at that point, the stands were very geometric, meaning the stands were kind of like what you think of a stadium that we go to. But when it came time for them to build it, George wanted it to be much more organic, as if the creatures who live on this planet had created this thing out of sort of secretions from their own body, or like a termite, or might build a big termite mound.
There were no two bleachers that were parallel to each other. It was a very organic sculptural shape. So trying to distribute creatures over the whole surface of the stadium was really challenging.
There's a nice character to the walk here and the flying, and I'm especially happy with how we're able to get some physical interaction. Watch how this Geonosian pushes Anakin up against the pole. It's those kind of moments that I'm always looking for. I really want the characters touching each other, because for you, the audience, I'm always thinking that helps you believe that they're both in the same space. They really exist in that world. Poggle the Lesser. We always joked about who Poggle the Greater was. This is Poggle the Lesser. I loved his armor and his bangles he had on his wrists. He's the leader of all the Geonosians. Much in the tradition of Episode 1, when Boss Nass didn't really look like a Gungan, and he was the leader of the Gungans. Poggle has this long tentacle beard that's simulated, much like how we do the clothing. Moves around. Then we come to the big bad creatures. The Reek, kind of like a rhino. The Acklay, kind of like a big crab character. Dragon, snake kind of. Animators always love to work on big, scary creatures and certainly violent actions. This particular action of the Nexu ripping this character off of the Ore and then dragging him away, we always went back and forth on whether it was a little too over the top. We joked about, what a 9-year-old or a 13-year-old would want to see, and we all agreed that they'd want to see that. But I know George was sensitive to us not going too over the top.
Well, this was just an absolute nightmare for a lot of reasons. I mean, getting the lighting right, building the miniature. John Knoll just did a great job bringing this all together, because this is a really complex bit of action. We never had it totally storyboarded out. It was a work in progress for a long period of time. But getting all these different elements, having, literally all the background be digital. The only thing we shot here was a portion, I'd say about 6 feet high or 7 feet, were the poles. And we brought the sand into a blue screen stage, and everything else is digital.
In terms of story and everything, this is not very complicated. Basically, it's a series of cliffhangers. The cliffhanger aspect of this is more like A New Hope, of Escape from the Death Star, where they go from one cliffhanger to another cliffhanger to another cliffhanger to another cliffhanger. And just when you think they're going to get it, they get rescued, and then they go and just about get it again and get rescued. So this is much more in the classic Saturday matinee style of cliffhangers.
The very first screening we had for just ourselves, just the editing crew and George, basically, we did it without any sound effects and music, because I felt that what we needed to see first was just the raw state of things. How well does the drama play as is? We know that sound effects and music are going to add greatly to it. But before we're distracted by that, we want to just evaluate where we are. So we've looked at the film, what we call naked. We're not naked, but the soundtrack is naked. It's naked the first time. And then after that, we begin to put in temporary sounds and temporary music and look at it in that way. And then you begin to see what role the music and sounds play.
Some shots in here that are homages to like Ray Harryhausen and other, classic fantasy, adventure, sci-fi, horror movies. You just have to keep your eyes open and know your movie history.
There probably is an animator at ILM that hasn't been inspired by Ray Harryhausen's work. Ray worked on films like Seven Voyages to Sinbad and Mysterious Island, Valley of Guanji, and certainly love watching those movies still.
We worked very hard to get 3 very distinctive creatures that would have different sounds, different feels. One is sort of like an elephant, one is sort of like a cat, one is like a large crab. They're very distinctive.
Always like this little interchange between Obi-Wan and the Acklay. I love how the Acklay pulls the spear out and then the effort to snap it in two. Obi-Wan jumping up. We'll put in actions like that. I originally thought that was just too broad, too comical, and George loved it, so it stays in the movie.
We could never really contemplate a sequence this complex before, and it really is a function of using digital editing using Videomatics and great advances in ILM in terms of their animation capabilities. The complexity of some of these shots and the fact that there's so many of them, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them, just was not possible. We were learning on the last film. Phantom Menace was a large exercise in learning how to use this new digital technology on the scale that we were contemplating. And this is really the result of that experiment of the Phantom Menace. We're still learning even on this movie. We keep pushing the envelope, but it's not the same learning curve that we had to accomplish on Phantom Menace. Phantom Menace really went from 0 to 80. This one goes from 80 to 90. The fun part of being able to set up a character like Mace Windu and Sam wanting to do the pictures is that we were able to set him up in the first film and then actually use him in this film. And there wasn't really any place for him to do battle or anything in that one, because ultimately everything is subservient to the story. And the plot was written 30 years ago, and there's a certain story that has to transpire. When I set a character up, I can't just use a character because I want to use a character. I can put him in there, and then he can grow into something in maybe the next movie, like this one with Sam Jackson, by making him, one of the Jedi Masters from the Jedi Council. When we get into here where we have, which I knew would end up in this film, which was a massive Jedi fight. And obviously he can be one of the leaders of that, and I can really utilize him. And Sam, obviously for him, that was what he wanted to do, but he had to put up with the little role in the first film in order to get to the bigger one in this one. And, and he's looking forward to the fact that he knows at the end of the Clone War he gets killed, so he has hopefully a great death scene. And, so you kind of know where everything's going. And you start with a little character. It's the same thing with Jimmy Smits, is an evolving character. He's hardly in this movie, but it's important that he be here so that he's established for the next movie where he actually gets to come into his own.
Battle droids are the same model from Episode 1. They've been colored to match the Geonosis color scheme, so they're more red. Custom work was then added in as well for actions that we didn't have. And what we were able to do here in this sequence that we were never able to do in Episode 1 is to really get into what's going on in the background of the shots. The little sub-fights or the little mini-fights. You can see in the background of all these shots, look for the lightsaber so you can see all the Jedi that they shot. Live-action Jedi that were pantomiming fighting with droids. We would animate them as little vignettes, which means we would take one element of a Jedi, animate 5 droids attacking it or fighting it. Some would die and some would fall down and some would be okay. And then John and his team take those little vignettes and layer them in to the backgrounds of wide shots like this.
I've added a couple shots, actually, that you'll see in the DVD and in the digital version, but not in the real version, which is that when the Reek stampedes over Jango, it wrecks his rocket pack. So there's little sparks in here and everything. And now I've added more sparks in the film version. These shots of Jango getting up and everything doesn't have sparks on it, but now they do. And you see at the very end of this sequence now, when he stands up, there's sparks there. And when Mace comes toward him, he tries to fire his rockets right there, and they don't work. Actually, you got these new shots in here. How'd you do that? I just did those yesterday, for God's sake.
Die, Jedi dogs! What did I say? Dear, I'm terribly sorry about all this.
This was a pickup scene. The reason we did this is because we just had too much action where they were separated for too long. So George came up with this idea where the cart is overturned, they both get into it, and they have their little bit of dialogue, and we see them connected and still at the same time battling everything else that's going on.
You call this a diplomatic solution?
No, I call it aggressive negotiations.
There's a real balance we're trying to find between real-world physics and Star Wars physics that George talks about. Sometimes I think creatures like that fall too quickly, but to serve the story, George really feels that we need to make them have a heavy impact and be moving quicker than potentially we would be moving them. And we roll along pretty fast in these shots. These are pretty quick shots, We're telling a lot of information here, and we're paying attention to the design. Like, so we're figuring out where we want you to look. Even though it looks random, there's actually a great deal of time put into choreographing these shots. Thinning out the background behind the key action, but making it complicated and rich enough that you still feel that you're in the middle of a battle. One of the other issues that you may not think that we're thinking about is the gunfire on these droids. You'll see that the super battle droids have these rapid-firing guns on their right arm, the destroyers with their guns, and then we have the battle droids with their blasters. We're actually thinking about what the sound is going to be like. Even though when we're animating this, we're animating silent. We don't know what the blaster sound is going to actually sound like until Ben Burt and his crew get involved. But we're thinking about how fast should we be firing these guns? Will it be just overwhelming for you as the audience? But here, see, watch how the guns click back into position. When we're animating that, we're making sound effects ourselves, like the little... But we have no idea what Ben's going to do. They're up at Skywalker Ranch and we're at ILM, and it actually happens months or a year apart easily between when we're animating something and when it finally gets its production sound. So I'm always as surprised as you are, or interested as you are as audience, to hear the sounds that go into what we do.
Surrender, and your lives will be spared.
We will not be hostages to be bartered, Dooku.
Then, I'm sorry, old friend.
In episode 4, we have the situation where everything builds up to the point where Luke's just about to be taken out by Vader, and Han Solo comes in and rescues him. In this one, we have the same thing where the Jedi are trapped, they're doomed, they're about to be destroyed, and Yoda comes in at the last second and saves them. So it's, again, the same idea interpreted and expressed in a different way.
This is one of those scenes when you're working with George and you just don't know where he comes up with this stuff. I take the same road to work that he does, and I just don't see any of this stuff. He comes in and it's always starts off, what if? What about, what do you think if we did this? Every day you're faced with these new challenges because scenes that started off very small end up just huge, and you've got to be very, very flexible because in the end of the day, that's what our job is. Our job is to enable him to be able to achieve whatever it is he comes up with. And this sequence is a classic example of George coming up with stuff that just would not stop. It's sheer, relentless 30 minutes of absolute mayhem, and you just don't know where he gets this stuff.
I wanted to have this one little shot of Boba with his father's helmet because that's really the motivation of his character for all the other movies. And then we move on to the Clone War, which is the sort of ultimate in high action. It's the kind of battle that we'd always wanted to do in Star Wars, but I was never able to get a movie with a kind of dynamic, much larger canvas to paint on it.
We wanted to try and keep some sort of anchor of reality, really wanted to have some real photographic material. So a team of us went out to the southwest and shot a ton of images, about, a couple of thousand images of different landscapes and that sort of thing for this. So we were able to shoot stills into tiles and make large panoramic versions for the background of these shots. And then we'd use the computer graphic terrain for all the flying shots and to marry the foregrounds and backgrounds together.
There was also a very cool idea, George's idea of the hologram of a war room in which, all the players are there. I mean, the good ones and the bad ones, and everybody's just taking a look at the theater and assessing, damages.
The clones look a little bit like stormtroopers, and it was a problem making sure it was clear to everyone that the clones are the good guys in this. So we'd put them in. Rob, you took somewhat gratuitous delight in the day that George decided he wanted to add clones in the back of all these ships.
Well, I think George really wanted to tie, as you can see in shots like this, the Jedi are clearly leading the clones, and the clones are the stormtroopers that we come to know later on. But we wanted to make sure that they were always associated with the Jedi. So there's shots of the clones just in behind Obi-Wan and Anakin inside the ships. And people may think that there were people in suits, but there was never, ever a clone trooper suit made. Every time you see them on screen, they're computer generated.
Yeah, I actually wanted to do a suit originally, this same idea of keeping it in, something in the element. And I sort of floated the question. They'd looked at it a little bit. And in the end, when we said we want to add these guys in suits, I said, well, George, maybe now it's time to consider making the costume. And George sort of just looked at me and said, you know what? You just gave me a CG R2-D2, CG C-3PO. They look great. The clones are going to look great. So all these shots of all the clones, all the clones in the suits that you see in the movie are entirely computer graphics.
There are literally thousands of clones in shots like this, all motion capture and animated. The huge vehicles, the terrain, it's all created inside the computer.
In my early imagination of Star Wars, this is one of the kinds of things I was thinking of. At that point, I couldn't even really contemplate. I could fantasize about it in my wildest imagination, but I couldn't even begin to think about including a sequence like this in a script. It just wasn't possible. But in the first burst of this great kind of intergalactic war, this is the kind of sequences that I was thinking about, and then very quickly pared them down to a simple space battle on a Death Star, and eventually was able to, expand it to walkers and in rather controlled situations. But now I'm able to really cut loose and have all these action pieces be what I'd always hoped they'd be.
It wasn't till much later in the post-production process that George came up with the idea of the Death Star, and it made the whole process of trying to find Dooku much more important.
We had this sequence, and because we added it, I came up with the idea of adding a little schematic of the Death Star in here, because the Geonosians build robots and build things. They're sort of the construction workers. They would be the ones that would probably be contracted to build the Death Star. And they were the ones that Jay and Silent Bob worried that they got killed on the Death Star, but they are, after all, just a bunch of large termites.
This is also a very difficult shot because we had only about 2 weeks to do it and no set, absolutely none. So this is a very rough set, photographed and digitally painted. And then the Pneumonian ship was coming from episode 1, and people are green screen, and then Dooku is digital.
So here you see there's a lot of elements that we added, the big smokes and that sort of thing, and a lot of destruction. And in the background here, you can see all the wind in Yoda's suit, but you can see some of the still photographs that we'd taken.
These clone models were built to come right up close. You can see how they're all dirty and grunged up. That's done on purpose. We don't want them to look like computer graphics. We want them to look aged and that they've been really in this battle.
We tried to give this whole battle a sense of realism by having sort of shaky cameras and zooms and all kinds of sort of rough photography, which gives you a lot of energy, but it's also on shots that are totally digital. I mean, they're not real at all. There is no camera involved, and there is no shake, there is no zoom.
For the whole thing, we really wanted to get a very gritty and much more like modern combat films that you've seen in the last 10 years, Phil, as well as convey the epic scope of the battle. So we used a lot of handheld, shaky cam type stuff. We used a lot of smoke and elements going off, and then they used smash zooms and the sort of stuff that you see in combat photography to try and give that sense of a lot more gritty battle going on.
There isn't time! Anakin and I can have...
Sand dunes here, we actually shot a big miniature set, and we'd shot it with a neutral colour and ended up going back and recolouring it because George felt it wasn't quite red enough to match the rest of Geonosis. It was tricky getting the materials for this set. We ended up using walnut shells to get a really fine-grained texture. Here we actually did some pretty amazing composite work where we took a shot of Padme rolling down a sand dune that we'd just shot at a quarry and replaced it with a miniature sand dune. So we'd had to match the original animation, shoot a motion control pass, and then replace it.
This scene with Padme falling out of the ship, when I originally wrote it and we cut it together, it didn't quite work. So in the editing process, I kept cutting it down until basically she falls out and they fly on. And we looked at it, and one of the assistant editors said, it really looks like something should happen there, and it doesn't. And so I said, well, I guess I didn't get away with this cutting it down. So what I'm going to have to do is reshoot it and add material to it to make it have more impact. So we reshot this scene with Hayden and Ewan, and really brought out the central issue, which was not in the first time I shot it, which was if you go back, you'll be expelled from the Jedi Order. And that level of confrontation hadn't been there.
So here it's getting a bit dark, and we wanted to get the sense of the sun going down, and a lot of this is digital matte. These are big digital matte paintings using a lot of the photography that we'd shot in the Southwest and stitched together. Big simulation shot that Rob's team did, combined with a lot of the big pyro elements that we'd shot specifically. So all the explosions we'd shot for the Clone War sequence.
This was very difficult to do for lots of reasons. The set was actually only on the thing on the left side, and obviously the electricity CG and lightsabers. So as the camera is going around the characters, we, like for instance, that view is a blue screen.
The ending sword fight has now become a kind of Star Wars tradition. But what it does is it takes a general battle and makes it a very specific personal battle. And the challenge I had with this is I have to have 3 different fights, and I have to make them different. And I had to begin to show that Dooku had these powers similar to what the Emperor had. He has Sith powers, dark side powers. But they ultimately have to end up in sword fights. So we do a little bit of the Sith thing in the beginning to get rid of Anakin and let Obi-Wan have his fight. Then the whole thing about what happened to Padme was kind of shot in one of the later shoots too, because it was, I realized that we had lost her, because I'm telling so many stories and doing so many things, and I just didn't think I could cut away from that sword fight to sort of deal with her. But then once I actually saw the movie, I realized that actually you want to see what happens to her, and you want her to end up, because before she just sort of ran at the end, but you want to know how she got there, and you need to tell that story.
This is a wonderful sequence where we really got to explore the ability of creating a CG double for Christopher Lee.
As a wonderful actor as Christopher Lee is, when we shot this, he was 79 years old. And so the majority of these moves he couldn't really quite do. For some shots, we had a stunt that will do the action, and then on top of that, we replace the stunt double's face with Christopher Lee's face. And in some other shots, we just replace him completely.
Having sort of level 1 of the sword fight with Obi-Wan, I then needed to progress to level 2 with Anakin, because each time we have a sword fight, it's got to get more intense and more intense. And so we came up with this idea of having Obi-Wan throw Anakin his sword so that he could fight with 2 swords for a little bit. And then I had Anakin cut a cable so I could do it in the dark. And I wanted to do a kind of go back to my old roots of a visual sequence, just a kind of a tone poem of lightsabers moving through dark and making it more of a visual idea than a action fighting idea.
I don't care where you come from. This is one of the great introductions.
Master Yoda.
Count Dooku.
You have interfered.
The first time I saw this with an audience was in London, when he starts to kick some serious butt. You cannot hear anything for about 5 minutes after the sequence is done. And you need a moment like this, because this is a moment that people have been waiting for. Obviously it was always going to be a very difficult sequence. How do you get, a 2.5 foot frogling to be fighting a 6'6" man? We never knew if it was going to work or not. And I think Rob did just such a exceptionally brilliant job in pulling it together, because it could have ended up completely ludicrous.
So if there was one sequence in this movie that kept me up more nights, it was this sequence. Originally, as it's scripted, he came in right away and started fighting with his lightsaber. John Knoll and Pablo Hellman and myself talked to George month after month about how we could make this real and believable. We felt that if we got into the fight too quickly, the audience would not be able to travel that distance from Yoda being an 800-year-old character and then being able to move around with such speed, being so nimble. So we talked to George about this, what we called the Wizard's Battle, and George added this into the sequence, and I think it really helps us as the audience travel with Yoda and find the inner strength and the energy to fight this evil Jedi Master, the Sith Lord.
To be very honest with you, I was scared to death of this sequence and how I was going to pull this off, because this was the biggest risk in the whole movie was, could I make this realistic enough to make it believable, or would it just be this most ludicrous joke? And so I was able to add the humor of him being an old man that became Superman and went back to an old man. I was able to have fun with it, but not make it look silly, which is what I was afraid was going to happen. But I was worried right up to the point where the animators showed me the shot where he walks in and looks tough. Suddenly, Yoda, in his acting and the way Frank Oz played it, I believe that this was a tough character that you have to watch out for. You know, it's not a transition that you say, oh, give me a break. It's like, oh, yeah, this is what we've been waiting for.
I just love the way they emphasize when Yoda walks in, like he's really huffing and puffing.
Yeah.
And then when he okay, now it's showtime, I have to get the strength and energy to fight Dooku. He really, it's just this transition. He summons up all the energy. And I think that's a great, great moment.
Important also to the moment is how Yoda comes out of that fight. The last shot, when we come back to him, we see the exhaustion on his face, and we see him gather his energy up, much like he did after he lifts the ship out of the swamp in Empire. You see this moment right here. We sort of resolve to what's happened, and he transforms back into that 800-year-old character, and walks off towards his comrades.
So this is Count Dooku's solar sailor approaching Coruscant. In theory, a solar sail uses photon pressure to propel it, just like a sailing vessel out on the ocean. In practice, the sail that we've got is far too small to provide any real thrust.
But Watto's wings were too small to make him fly, and it still worked.
Star Wars.
Well, Star Wars physics, remember?
So the solar sailor flies through a recognizable part of Coruscant and then heads towards this abandoned industrial district of Coruscant.
This is also one of my favorite sequences because as you see the solar sailor arrive, it's just about to enter this huge building. As it does so, you can just see Christopher Lee actually standing up in a chair and walking towards the exit.
This is actually a digital Count Dooku standing up and walking out of the solar sailor bubble. And it's going to cut to real Christopher Lee walking up the ramp of the full-size piece that was in Sydney, I guess.
We do reveal that Dooku is Darth Tyrannus. He's a Sith Lord, and that he's in league with Darth Sidious, and Darth Sidious is pulling all the strings, and everything is going just the way he wants them to go. The Emperor continues to pull the strings.
Everything is going as planned.
This is a very difficult shot that you say Wesky and Gradikofer worked on, and I say last time that we see the Jedi Temple, and you can see that the whole movie turned towards a warm color, very saturated red, just to accentuate, the gravity of the situation. When Obi thinks that they won, and Yoda knows that they didn't win, that the war has started.
I agree.
Where is your apprentice? On his way to Naboo.
I knew when we get into this last sequence that takes place in the Jedi Temple, and with the last shot that we see Yoda in this episode, that this was an important acting moment for him. And the reason was because it was so subtle. You watch what's going on in the eyes, and the eyebrows, and the ears. The attitude in this character is very, very important. George was very particular about this acting moment you're going to see in this last shot.
Begun. The Clone War has.
I think starting with Star Wars and probably continuing on with Close Encounters and the many films which were born and grew up in this era of blockbuster summer movies, it was discovered early on that one way to give your film a fitting climax was to have the soundtrack be as deep and as rumbling and as much bass as possible. Just an earthquake rumble. And that rumble could be a ship taking off or a ship landing or the destruction of a world or a planet.
This is the beginning of the Empire right here. You can begin to see that this same ships and all this stuff is the same visual look that ultimately becomes the Empire. In the wedding scene, I was going to do it two ways. One where she took his metal hand, and the other way where she took his other hand. And I ended up shooting it originally with him taking her other hand because I felt that was the kindest way. But then after seeing the movie, I decided it would be better to have him also take her in his metal hand and have a little bit more of the Darth Vader influence. So we shot that later. It wasn't able to get into the actual film release, but it did get into the digital release and in the DVD. I think of these films in larger groups, and I ultimately think of them as 12 hours, 6 parts. Going back and doing the backstory was an interesting challenge to me. Original Star Wars was designed to be 4, 5, and 6, and it was designed to be something you came in the middle of. I guess ultimately what I looked forward to the most in going back was the fact that I could deal with how the empire was created, how a society goes from a democratic society to a dictatorship, and at the same time contrast that with a personal story about how a good person turns bad.
I never liked this credit. I thought specifically that, when the credits were being done, this credit should come up first, but I haven't been able to crack that yet. No, I'm only kidding.